Figured if I was gonna make a video on Dark Academia, I would at least look the part. It wasn't the outfit I wanted to do at first, not gonna lie, but like, it's kind of cute though. Literally just school uniform with extra steps, but... Dark Academia really took off in popularity this year, I want to say in 2020, on Instagram, TikTok, Tumblr, the usual places. As an aesthetic, it tends to devote itself to like the romanticization of school and of learning. You know, the turtlenecks, the blazers, the coffee stained letters written in careful cursive, with flowers pressed between addressed to your lover, Latin, coffee addiction, poetry, wine. Say no more. That's Dark Academia. But it's probably worth noting that Dark Academia was probably either directly from or influenced by an earlier Tumblr community called Study Blur. Study Blur really became a thing in 2014, around that time, and where Dark Academia was very dark and grimy and existentialist and like all about the mystery and suspense, Study Blur favors a more lighter color scheme. It doesn't romanticize the past like Dark Academia tends to. It draws a lot of fashion inspiration, Dark Academia that is, from 1930s and 1940s Ivy League / Oxbridge fashion, you know, the tweed, that kind of vibe. But Study Blur is far more minimalist and modernist and very, very clean and neat and all about that very neat palette, if that makes sense. And I think that's very, very interesting that we have two very similar aesthetics. One is even much older than the other one, but one blows up in a way that the other one doesn't. And you could argue that Dark Academia is what happens to Study Blur when it leaves the confines of Tumblr. But that still leaves me at a question, which is, why Dark Academia? I think it's a little bit harder to get into Dark Academia when you're in the UK. Like, I see a lot of posts of like old mysterious church buildings or trees with no leaves, or students, little kids like just running around in school uniform, and well, that's kind of what I see around me. Like, it's hardly very romantic, is it? And I guess what I realize is that romanticization requires a little bit of fantasy. It has to look like your life, but better. There needs to be a little gap for you to imagine and fantasize through. So no wonder the aesthetic that's more fantastical is the one that really takes off. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it's this year that it really blows up either. Like, I think everyone can generally agree that 2020 has been a really hard time for most people. Like, lots of people have lost jobs, lost family members. It's hard being a student in these conditions. And people just need some kind of escapism. So you get an aesthetic that looks kind of like you. An intelligent college or university student, but with that little gap. The mysterious buildings, the romantic poetry, the letters. And I think that the grunge and the darkness is part of the appeal, because that's kind of what it feels like right now. Like, everything feels dark and heavy, so you get an aesthetic that reflects that a little bit, but with that gap of you being, you know, the super rich boarding school student, getting to study Shakespeare and Greek sculpture and the greats, the canon. Dark Academia loves its past, and I think that can lead to some really dodgy situations. Now, before I carry on, I just want to make a little disclaimer that I'm not trying to get anybody to like stop having fun or stop identifying with Dark Academia. Like, I love the concept as an aesthetic, and not gonna lie, it's kind of what's getting me through my GCSEs. Like, it's not a good time. And I get like the importance that it has right now, and it's something that I enjoy. Like, I try to I tried to go shopping for like dark academic clothes, then I realised, wait, this is just school uniform with extra steps. I don't know, but I guess I realised that it's very important to be able to like critically analyse the things that you partake in, and that's kind of just me doing that. I think that the thing with the dark academia is that it gets you to imagine that you are one of the elites. You go to a fancy boarding school, can speak 6 different languages, spend all your time studying the classics, and well, that's not really normal people stuff. You are a member of the academic elite just by merit of taking part in the aesthetic. That's the basic assumption being made. And the fact that it romanticizes a very complicated institution like academia can put us in kind of a tricky place. Like, the assumption being made that you're one of them means that unless you're non-white, you never really question why all the people that the dark academia looks up to, all the notable figures, are all very, very white. You never question the Eurocentrism, or the fact that all the languages that seem to be considered worth learning are European ones. And as a Nigerian person, as a Yoruba person, that really stings a lot to see, because it's just another way that our cultures and our histories and our languages have been demonized and erased like over and over again. And I'm not saying that you're a colonizer just for taking part in the trend. I'm saying that the ghost, the remains of colonialism and of institutional structural racism lingers in the air. And I never even know if there's any point in mentioning that I'm bilingual, because, well, you see the switch in their face when they realize that my second language is Yoruba, not French. Like, somehow the only languages that are worth learning are European ones. Like, being bilingual is considerably... I saw a tweet that I'm gonna try to put up, like, on screen. It's almost like being bilingual is just much less impressive if you're not white and not European. And I read a lot of modern classics. I think that's probably my favourite genre. And the authors would just like randomly just throw in a French phrase or like a German or Italian phrase, like from out of nowhere. and it's almost, and people, the way people interact with it makes it seem like it classes up the writing a little bit to just randomly, you know, just throw in a French. I'm reading Lolita right now and oh my god. The amount of times I've had to like pull up Google Translate, like, what is this man saying? But yeah, and so I started doing that with my own writing, like just randomly throwing in a Yoruba phrase just because I can. And one of my favourites are Ifemi, which means my love, Tara Tara, and I think Tara Tara is very, very interesting because Yoruba, and I would argue that probably even Nigerians and West Africans more broadly, are very, very physical speakers. Like we talk with our hands, we use a lot of gestures, we use our whole body to communicate. We're very heavy on the paralanguage, like the hand motions, the facial expressions, they become like almost as important or just as important as the actual words that you're saying when you're communicating. And to say then that you love somebody with all of your monifere, that's I love you. To say monifere Tara, that's saying I love you with every fibre of my being, everything that I can physically muster, all that love and that passion and that energy, just everything. And that's beautiful. And toko, which means with mind, you can also repeat it. I think a lot of Yoruba, not a lot, but like quite a few words, never mind, I was gonna go off on a tangent about like qualifiers, never mind. Toko, which means with mind. And I think it fits quite nicely with the dark academia aesthetic as well, because it's a very, very intellectual sort of romance. It reminds me a little bit of this poem that let me see if I can remember the first lines. I would like to sleep with you. I would like to, oh crap, but basically she's like, I want to go into your mind and like give you the silver branch that will I don't know, man, something about in the center. I just remember like word fragments from it. If I remember, I'll put it on screen as well. But yeah, it's saying, because the thing with your mind is that it knows no bounds. You can't, it doesn't exist on a plane. You can't put limits to it. You can't confine it. And I just, like, I think that's beautiful, but we're too busy recycling the same English and French phrases to realize that there's beauty in non-European languages as well. I think another side effect of being assumed to be a part of the elite is that worship of the canon. You know, your Shakespeare and Michelangelo, all these old dead white men, the other old, sometimes dead, white men have decided, or what is, you know, worthy of our time and our attention. But when that's the only narrative that we get, isn't that still erasure? If I'm sitting, this is just a wider rant about school now, but if I'm sitting in class and the only text there is only one piece of writing in everything that I study for English GCSEs, one piece of writing that's written by someone who isn't white. All the poems are written by white men. I think there's like 2 that's written by white women, and then one poem that's written by a black man. Just let that sink in. And do you know what the poem is about? The poem is about erasure. The poem is about black history and black culture being erased in academia. And that's the only poem that we have in the... Just let that sink in. But that's wild. I'm sorry, I have to laugh or I'll just... Like, if you're sitting in a classroom and that is the only thing that looks like you, and everywhere, and all the images of intellectualism that you've seen don't look like you, isn't that still a kind of violence? Like, isn't that limiting the amount of opportunities, the amount of ways that we're allowed to see ourselves? Because isn't that what art quite fundamentally is about? It's about being able to see yourself reflected back to you. And if you don't get that reflection, then isn't that saying that you don't exist? Like, they're straight up refusing to acknowledge our existences. And isn't that a kind of violence? Because if you don't see somebody, then you don't see them when they suffer, you don't see them when they're hurting. And that's one of the things, this is just a broader tangent now, but that's one of the reasons why I really hate the phrase "I don't see colour," because, well, you might not, but the system does. And if you're refusing to see the difference between us, then you're refusing to see me when I get hurt because of that difference. But anyway, as I was saying, I've forgotten what I'm saying. I'm looking at my script now to try to get back on track. I don't remember where I stopped. Oh yeah, dark academia does quite well, like in terms of LGBT representation. You know, you have your Oscar Wilde, your Walt Whitman, your Sappho. That's all good. But what happened to James Baldwin? Or Alice Walker? What happened to The Colour Purple? What? And to be fair, Chimamanda Adichie isn't queer, but she's a really... I have 3 of her books on my shelf right now. I have Americana, probably my favourite one. I have We Should All Be Feminists, and then Half of a Yellow Sun. I haven't finished this one. I've been reading it for 2 years now. I think I'm taking a break off it, but I'll finish it like later, because at the moment it's kind of hard to read. Not any fault of the writing itself, but like it deals a lot with the Biafran revolution, some of the conflict that happened as a result of colonialism. It's really heavy, but I would recommend it. I would really recommend it. It's quite chunky. Both of her texts are quite chunky. This is a pretty quick read. She has a TED talk of it. I would really recommend Chimamanda. She's so good. But yeah, when all of the philosophies that are held up by dark academia, you know, your Plato, your Nietzsche, they're all Western philosophies. What happened to Native American philosophy, or Asian, South and Eastern? What happened to African philosophies? We're just not given that same energy and that same time of day. We straight up just don't exist, and not being allowed to exist is a form of violence. Or at the very best, it's allowing violence to happen. It's being a bystander. Like, what happened to influential Black American philosophers like Frantz Fanon or Oyewunke. Like, I wouldn't lie. Like, it hits so good to be looking into an academic text and realize, like, oh, the person who wrote this is Yoruba. Like, to see a very Yoruba name, and like her name too has all the Ila. It has all the it has all the accents on, and I always feel like such a bother when I'm spelling out my name, because the accents are very confusing. I'm like, I actually learned Ila at school, kind of. I was really bad at Yoruba. I hated it so bad. But it is quite difficult. But to see it, to see it in Google and see it spelt correctly with all the Ila and everything, like, that's not something I see. And think that just something as little as just a name being spelled correctly means so much. Yeah, and what happened to, you know, Du Bois? Time and time again, from race realists to eugenicists or phrenologists, like, Black people have been gatekept from academia and intellectualism over and over again. And that's something that kind of follows into dark academia, when the top creators and damn near everybody is white. Dark academia holds certain works as high art without questioning what makes them so, and it worships these classics without digging very deeply into what they actually mean in the context of today's society, the places they hold now. And I think this is also criticism that applies more broadly to academia. Like, for example, Macbeth. I do Macbeth at school, and boy do I have thoughts for you. It's a very conservative story. That's conservative with a small c. It's essentially pro-monarchist propaganda. Like Macbeth writes it after the gunpowder plot, essentially to suck up to King James, I think it was. I don't know, man. And if you really sit and you think about Macbeth as a play, you realize that the real crimes that they do isn't killing the king. Lady Macbeth, she's my favorite character out of all of them. Duncan, ew. Malcolm, they're so one-dimensional. It's like, okay, I get to you're an antithesis. Moving on. Moving on. Lady Macbeth's real crime isn't plotting to kill the king with her husband, because if you think about it, she doesn't do anything. The most that she does is wash the daggers. The most that she does is pretend to faint. But she still suffers like this horribly tragic end and like commits suicide like halfway through the play. If you think about it, her real crime isn't plotting to kill the king. Her real crime is plotting to kill the king as a woman. I have notes on the play on my wall right now. And I have like tons on gender in Shakespeare, because it's probably like the most interesting one. And she, at one point, she's like, take my milk for gold and like unsex me here. And she's asking to be cleansed of her femininity. But it's important to realize that she's not asking to be cleansed of her womanhood. She's not rejecting her womanhood. She's rejecting the box that people have put her in, what they say that she can and can't do because she's a woman. And the same thing applies to Macbeth. Like, his real crime isn't so much killing the king as it is daring to leave his position as a thane, and daring, it's the ambition, that's what they say over and over, that's his hamartia, his ambition, the fact that he allows himself to even question the status quo. Like, why is Duncan the one that's king? Why isn't it me? It's that act of questioning, that insolence, that's what he's really punished for. Everybody in Macbeth that suffers a terrible, tragic end. They do it not because they've done something horrendous, which they have. Murder is not good. Murder is not good. But what they're really suffering for is their nonconformity. It's their deviances. So I don't like Macbeth as a play. I won't lie to you. And it tends to glorify super toxic traits as masculinity. Like as we're analysing the play, some teachers, not all, I don't think my teacher really does this, I don't know, but some teachers will interact, I don't know if that's the right word, with Macbeth as he starts the play as a valiant masculine hero, and there's just like quotes about his sword, and then as he moves through the play, he's less confrontational. He sends like henchmen to go do the murder kill for him. That's what my teacher says. Like, he doesn't do things directly, and some people will be like, oh yeah, that's him becoming more feminine. Like, that is incredibly toxic. That is a terrible message. So why are we teaching our young men to turn out essays in the middle of a crisis with toxic masculinity, where we're having like these incredibly high rates of male suicide? In the middle of this crisis, we're getting young men to turn out essays about how Macbeth bad because weak. Like, what is the message that we're trying to pass across without ever getting them to critically engage with the implication of what they're writing? Like, I completely understand that Shakespeare is an important part of English culture and like literature and all that stuff, but what is the place that it has now? If that's one of the implications of getting hung up on the past, is that we're too caught up in this romanticization, this nostalgia, to critically engage in what it means now. And I'm not saying that we should stop studying Shakespeare, I'm just saying that this is something that we need to think about as we're thinking about Shakespeare, or at least Macbeth as a play. My laptop battery just died, but it's good because I was starting to conclude anyway, so I'll just use my phone, it's fine. But I recently found a post about indigenous dark academia, and dark academia is generally pretty skewed towards white people. So when I saw that post, I was like, ooh, this looks really good, I like this idea. So I've been thinking, what would Nigerian dark academia look like? So here's my top 3. Number 1, suddenly, so if you're in SS3 is like the final year of secondary school, you generally be, the Nigerian education system is kind of weird because it's pretty sped up. Like, if I was in Nigeria, I'm in year 11 right now, I'm 15. If I was in Nigeria, I would be in SS2. So I would be almost in my last year, because they do the 2 years of sixth form, they do it in 1 year. So I guess, I don't know, man, it's the last year of secondary school, and you would be like 16, 17, 15 even, sometimes 14. Again, it's really sped up, you can skip years, people skip years. But you're in SS3, studying for your WIAC, your IGCSEs, your everything, it's the last year of exams, and so you stay behind at school, everybody else goes home for the Easter holidays, but you get extra lessons, and you spend all this time with your classmates that you never did before. You spend lazy Sunday evenings, just lounging in the common room, bonding with these people that you never really spoke to over your fears and your anxieties and the pressure that your parents are putting on you to do well, spending time in the routine that like stress studying, but like hopeful as well. It's quite hopeful, because you're putting in just so much effort and so much energy, and it generally tends to pay off. Now, because the Nigerian education system is pretty demanding. Comparing Chinua Achebe, who's an Igbo author, to Wole Soyinka, who's Yoruba, and comparing how their respective languages and cultures, because they're both Nigerian, how their respective cultures and languages like influence their different texts, and yeah, that's something I would want to do definitely, but I haven't read a lot of them. Like, I know I've read Arrow of God, I think that was by Chinua Achebe, and I read Some of Things Fall Apart, also by Chinua Achebe, but I've not read anything by Wole Soyinka. Anyway, yeah. Or half school. On Fridays we would only have like half school days. And you would, and once it like hit 12, you'd go to school in your PU uniform. Once it hit 12, like people would, you know, go outside and play football in the hot sun, or just like lie on the grass. It was always like boiling, and you would like buy ice cream from through the gate. You weren't supposed to, but you did anyway. It was a good time. It was a good time. So what would dark, okay, if you're non-white or have a non-European culture, what would dark academia look like in your culture? I think that would be really interesting to talk or think about. Or even if you are, just something spicy, not spicy, I don't know. Something that's not British, not American, and not French. Sorry. Just something different, please. But yeah, what would dark academia look like in your culture? Okay, so it's editing me, and I usually don't like telling people to like subscribe or like the video, but like if you reach the end, you might as well. You might as well. And you should probably follow me on Instagram or Twitter, and Twitter, and or I don't know, man, do whatever you want. Because that way you can like vote on the because I do polls, and like you can like suggest stuff for me to talk about, because you know I love suggestions. I have like tons of ideas, and it's just I get really indecisive. Sometimes I need people to just be like, do this. But yeah, bye.